Okay, in this particular video, we're going to be applying what we learned in the last video about simple quadratic equations to solve an actual problem that is commonly found in physics and other areas of science. So suppose you're standing on top of a building and then you drop a ball from it. So basically, the height of the ball above the ground after t seconds, so t is a variable here, it can take on any value, is given by the following equation. So we have the height, h, equals to 60 minus 5 times t squared. So the height of the ball is essentially the distance, in this case, from the ground to the position of the ball at that time. So you can imagine that as you increase in time, so if this number goes higher, then you're going to be subtracting a larger amount from 60, which means that the ball at some point it is going to hit the ground. So basically, this is what we would call a quadratic equation or quadratic function. So there are three parts to this question, and we're going to be solving each one individually by applying these concepts that we learned in the last video. So the first question is going to ask, what is the height after 3 seconds? So the height is given by this equation, and they're giving us the time. So all we need to do is we put this value into the equation and calculate h. So let's just do question A here. So our equation is h equals to 60 minus 5 t squared. And if we make t equals to 3 seconds, then we're going to have the following. H is going to be equal to 60 minus 5 times 3 squared, which is the same as 60 minus 5 times 3 squared is 9, so that's going to be 9, which is equal to 60 minus 45. And then that means that the height of the ball at that time is going to be equal to 15 meters. So you can think of it this way. If you were to calculate, okay, so how tall is the building? Well, all you need to do is you need to plug in t equals to 0 here, because that means that at time 0, there is really the ball hasn't moved, it's still at the top. So then that means that the height of the building is going to be 60 meters. So already after 3 seconds, you have traveled 3/4 of the way down towards the ground. So it's falling pretty fast, I would say. Now, after how many seconds will the ball reach the ground? Answer to 2 decimal places. Well, this is a question where we actually need to rearrange the equation in a way that we can solve for time. So after how many seconds means that we need to solve for t. And we need to find out, okay, so we have h equals to 60 minus 5t squared. What does it actually mean? We need to know what h is. But we know, okay, so once the ball reaches the ground, the distance between the ground and the ball is going to be 0 because the ball is already on the ground. So that means that it is going to be h equals to 0. So if we write the equation in this way, 60 minus 5t squared, then we can rearrange it and solve for t, just in the same way that we did in the last video. So we can have 5t squared equals to 60, and then we can have t squared equals to 60 divided by 5, that's going to be 12. And now we take the square root of both sides, and then that's going to be square root of 12. Okay? Okay, but then we need to be very careful here, because can time be negative? And that's a question that we need to ask when we're solving practical questions. In this case, this is a physics question. So we need to really think about it. Can time ever be negative? I mean, no, it cannot be negative. So that means that the only possible solution that would actually be applicable in this case is the positive one. So t has to be equal to positive square root of 12. And in this case, they tell us to approximate the answer to 2 decimal places. So we just plug this in the calculator, and that's going to come out as 3.46 seconds. So that's going to be the answer. So we're going to approximate that. All right, so no biggie there. That's pretty much it. So this is just, I mean, we could have it, but in this case, we have to think about it practically. Is time ever going to be negative? No. So we just write it as the positive solution. And then question C is, after how many seconds was the ball at a height of 40 meters? So in this case, they're giving us the height equals to 40 meters. And we're asked to find after how many seconds. So once again, we need to solve for time. So h equals to 60 minus 5t squared. And then if we put 40 into the left hand side here, so just h equals 40, we're going to have 60 minus 5t squared. Now we can subtract 60 from both sides, so we're going to be left with minus 5t squared equals to 40 minus 60 is minus 20, which means that we can actually multiply both sides by minus 1 to make this positive, so 5t squared equals to 20. Now we can divide both sides by 5, so t squared equals to 4. And then that means that t is going to be equal to plus or minus square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2 seconds. But then again, we know that time can never be negative, so in that case we need to actually select the answer that corresponds to this physical example. So t is going to be equal to 2 seconds. And that's about it. So solving simple quadratic equations is pretty straightforward. Later on, we're going to learn how to solve more complicated quadratic equations. So there are some really nice tricks and formulas to that. And we can actually use those in a lot more applications than this one. But hopefully now you understand how to do equations that are not linear. To a certain degree, these are simple ones. But at least now you have a better idea of how to do them.